The tension in Los Angeles had been building for weeks, ever since Dylan, full name Melissa Dillon, entered the glittering world of Forrester Creations. She arrived not as a stranger, but as someone who had already caused a stir in the younger generation's personal lives. Will Spencer, Bill and Katie's attractive and conflicted son, had found solace in her companionship when the flaws in his relationship with Electra Forrester become too obvious to overlook. Ivy Forrester, Electra's fiercely protective aunt, saw it all as a betrayal, an inappropriate attachment that jeopardized the family's fragile peace. What began as criticism gradually evolved into something darker and more premeditated, as Ivy refused to allow Dylan to just exist in their circle. Dylan had landed a job at Forrester Creations thanks to Steffi's unexpected offer, giving her the opportunity to prove herself beyond the whispers and judgments. She happily took it, formally introducing herself for the HR files, her voice firm in the face of churning undercurrents. The fashion brand, with its storied history of beauty and drama, seemed like the ideal place to start over. But Ivy saw the hiring as an invasion. She stormed into the offices, demanded explanations from Steffi, and made it obvious that Dylan's presence was not acceptable. Electra, who was already grieving from Will's straying affections, exacerbated Ivy's fury by portraying Dylan as the seductress who had stolen her boyfriend's attention. In their quest to drive Dylan out, the two ladies formed odd alliances. Ivy's activities become bolder over time. She accosted Dylan in the Forrester Creations hallways, her Australian accent keen with accusation. She accused her of overstepping, wearing company designs without permission, and transgressing boundaries that should never be broken. Ivy lost her cool one afternoon in the lending closet, where models and staff chose their outfits. When she saw Dylan trying on a piece, she became enraged. She accused her outright of stealing, stating that the apparel was business property being misused. The dispute erupted, with words booming off the racks of couture. Ivy didn't stop with words. She began devising strategies to make the charges stick. Rumors circulated that she may hide something incriminating, perhaps a piece of precious jewelry from the safe, in Dylan's bag, only to discover it in front of witnesses such as Steffi or the security team. The goal was simple: get Dylan fired, humiliated, and run out of town forever. Dylan, however, was not naive. She'd overheard enough chats to recognize the danger. She put together Ivy's plots by lurking near design offices and catching snatches in the break room. Daphne Rose, Steffi's close friend, gets involved, clashing with Ivy about her meddling ways. Dylan had more ammunition after their furious exchanges, but she chose silence for the time being, biding her time. She confided in Will in quiet moments, telling him how Ivy's involvement felt like a noose around her neck. Will, torn between loyalty to his girlfriend's family and developing feelings for Dylan, swore to support her. However, the pressure increased and cracks formed in his determination. The turning point came unexpectedly, not from a planted trinket or a forced firing, but from something far more buried and sinister. For months, whispers had spread about Luna, Noelle's awful end, the young woman whose death had left a lasting impression on the town. Luna's death was initially ruled accidental, but discrepancies persisted, including unusual time frames, missing evidence, and a suspicion that someone had hidden tracks. Dylan knew more than she admitted. She had been closer to Luna than most people realized, possibly sharing secrets or confidences in the shadows of their intersecting circles. And at one terrible moment, she revealed to Will a sliver of the truth, a fact about Luna's final hours that left him stunned. The specifics were chilling: a failed confrontation, a shove or a fall, and a desperate attempt to conceal the truth. Will's world shifted as he processed the information, calling into question all he believed he knew about the people around him. Ivy, ever attentive, overheard the confession. She had been keeping a close eye on Dylan, following her movements and eavesdropping behind closed doors. One evening, as the sun set low over the city, Ivy cornered Dylan in a quiet corridor of the Forrester building. The air was heavy with the aroma of fabric and perfume, but the atmosphere was fraught with danger. Ivy's eyes glowed with a combination of triumph and fear. She had discovered something, possibly a recording, an old message, or a hidden file that directly linked Dylan to Luna's death. It wasn't simply a suspicion anymore. It was evidence. Audio evidence, faint but definite, captured people in a heated discussion, a name mentioned in alarm, and footsteps fleeing a situation that ended tragically. Dylan froze as Ivy played the clip from her phone, the sound tinny but damning. "You thought you could bury this," Ivy muttered, her tone low and poisonous. "You thought no one would dig deep enough. But I did. For Electra, for the family, for justice." Dylan's face was pale. She mumbled denials at first, claiming that the context was missing and that it didn't seem right. But Ivy pressed on relentlessly. She described how she pulled it together. Late-night searches, talks with old acquaintances, and even a perilous journey to locations associated with Luna's final days. Dylan's final confession tumbled out in bits as he realized he could not escape. At that point, the mask slipped. Dylan, Melissa, admitted some truth. She argued that it was not deliberate murder, but rather a tragic accident exacerbated by anxiety and poor decisions. Luna had learned something alarming, possibly about a plot involving prominent people in their group, and the clash erupted. A struggle, a fall from a height, or a lethal strike, followed by terror. Dylan had fled, leaving the scene prepared to seem an overdose or accident. The guilt had been eating at her ever since, driving her to Los Angeles, Will, and Forrester Creations, as if the glamour would wash away the stain. But Ivy had revealed it all. The conflict lasted into the night. Ivy urged that Dylan give herself in, threatening to go public if she refused. Dylan appealed for forgiveness, citing her youth, her regrets, and the life she was attempting to restore. Tears ran down her cheeks as she explained her nightmares and constant fear of exposure. Ivy hesitated for a second, her protective instincts colliding with the horror of what she had discovered, but her resolve strengthened. She saw Dylan as a menace who had penetrated their lives and hidden immeasurable horror. Word immediately circulated through the family grapevine. Steffi was summoned, her face a mask of amazement when Ivy presented the evidence. Electra arrived next, shocked to find that the woman she had loathed for personal reasons had committed a far bigger transgression. Will remained astonished and silent, the weight of Dylan's truth overwhelming him. The Forrester mansion became a battleground of allegations and denials. Ridge and Brooke argued the ramifications for the company's reputation, while Bill urged immediate action to safeguard his kid. Katie encouraged caution, reminding everyone that justice required more than a single recording. Finally, Ivy made the call. She handed over the evidence to authorities, her fingers solid despite the tremble in her voice. Dylan was hauled into custody gently, and the arrest made headline news by morning. The newspapers surged with speculation. Forrester insider linked to cold case death. Ivy's vengeance exposes shocking truth. The family was stunned, wondering how they had missed the signals. Electra felt a twisted relief. Her competitor was gone. But at what cost? Will wrestled with betrayal, questioning whether he had ever truly known Dylan. Months later, the echoes persisted. Trials loomed, and testimonies were prepared. Ivy, previously the meddling aunt, transformed into the unlikely hero who exposed buried misdeeds. However, victory tasted bitter. She had shielded her family, but in doing so, she revealed the rot behind the surface glamour of their world. Dylan, facing judgment, bore the weight of her final confession, a truth too long suppressed, now exposed by a woman who refused to keep secrets buried. The bold and the beautiful continued its never-ending cycle of love, betrayal, and disclosure, but this chapter inflicted scars that no fashion line could ever erase. The room was quieter than Ivy had anticipated. For days, she had mentally rehearsed the scene, anticipating arguments, shouting, and possibly even denial. Instead, there was a heavy quiet that felt thicker than any confrontation she had planned for. Dylan stood near the window, his countenance unusually serene. Ivy kept a close eye on him, her instincts telling her that what she had learned may change everything, not just for him, but for everyone around them. She had previously trusted Dylan without reservation. There was a time when his words were firm and reassuring, and his presence made any uncertainty seem bearable. However, her perception of him was gradually deteriorating. Small irregularities emerged first. Weird phone calls, late-night absences, and ambiguous answers that never quite fit. Ivy had dismissed them at first, thinking she was just overthinking things. However, the more she ignored the signs, the more they increased. Everything changed after the paperwork appeared. The envelope had arrived with no return address. At first, Ivy assumed it was a mistake, some paperwork intended for someone else. However, within were records, photographs, and printed emails, pieces of a story that built a troubling picture. Dylan's name appeared again, linked to situations that had never been officially explained. One snapshot in particular refused to leave her mind. Dylan standing next to a man whose disappearance had made headlines months before. Ivy had stared at that photo all night, trying to convince herself it didn't mean anything. But deep down, she knew it was everything. She was now standing face to face with him, the evidence safely stowed in her purse. Dylan gently turned toward her, sensing the tension in the air. "You look like you've got something on your mind," he replied, smiling slightly. The nonchalant tone made Ivy's stomach twist even tighter. She had expected defensiveness, perhaps even rage. Instead, his tranquility seemed like a skillfully crafted facade. "There's something we should talk about," Ivy replied. Dylan leaned against the wall and folded his arms. "So serious, huh?" Ivy hesitated for a second. A part of her still hoped for a simple explanation, anything that would relieve the dread in her chest. However, the recollection of the documents burned too brightly. She reached into her bag and removed the photograph. "Do you recognize him?" Dylan took a glimpse at the picture. His eyes twitched with something, surprise, possibly even fear, but the impression vanished almost swiftly. "Looks familiar," he observed attentively. "Why?" "He's been missing for 6 months," Ivy explained sadly. "The police never found any trace of him." The silence that followed was oppressive. Dylan placed the photo on the table without looking at it again. "Many individuals go missing, Ivy. That doesn't mean I was involved." "I didn't claim you were," she said, her voice trembling. But Dylan understood exactly what she meant. His jaw tightened slightly. "Where did you get it?" "That's not the point. It is if you're accusing me of something." The tension between them became more with each passing moment. Ivy could feel her heart thumping as she withdrew the remaining documents from the envelope. "These are the point," she explained, spreading them across the table. Dylan's gaze searched the documents. This time, his emotion was impossible to conceal. "You went digging," he replied slowly. "I went looking for the truth. Or maybe you went looking for trouble." Ivy refused to back down. "Then explain it. Explain why your name keeps coming up in instances where individuals disappear." Dylan didn't respond straight away. For the first time since the talk began, his confident demeanor began to break. He approached the window and stared out, as if looking for an escape somewhere beyond the glass. "You don't understand what you're getting into," he whispered gently. "Then help me understand." He laughed quietly, but there was no amusement in the sound. "That is exactly the problem," Ivy realized with a chill. Dylan didn't dispute it. He was about to admit it. "Do you remember when we first met?" he inquired unexpectedly. The unexpected question caught her off surprise. "Of course I do. I told you my past wasn't simple. You said you'd made mistakes." Dylan nodded slowly. That was the polite version. Ivy's throat clenched. "What is the true version?" He returned to face her, his eyes darker than she had ever seen them. "The real version is that some mistakes can't be undone." The words hit hard between them. Ivy felt the air leaving her lungs. "Did you enter those individuals?" Dylan did not answer immediately. Instead, he returned to the table, glancing at the scattered documents as if they belonged to someone else's story. "I never expected things to escalate to that point," he finally said. The answer confirmed her darkest fears. "So it's true," Ivy muttered. "I didn't start out wanting to be that person," Dylan said, disregarding her trembling voice. "But sometimes situations spiral beyond your control." "You're talking about people's lives," Ivy replied sternly. "Do you think I don't know that?" His abrupt intensity made her take a step back. For a minute, neither of them spoke. The weight of everything unsaid pressed down like a storm poised to erupt. Ivy had anticipated this encounter numerous times, but she never expected Dylan to stand there and acknowledge it so honestly. Why? She finally asked. The one word seemed to resound throughout the room. Dylan lowered his gaze to the floor. Because once you're involved in certain things, he replied gently, walking away isn't an option. Ivy attempted to understand what he was saying. Are you claiming someone forced you? I'm saying I was already in too deep before I grasped the consequences. His comments were tinged with regret and resignation. But you kept going, Ivy replied. Dylan looked up again, meeting her gaze. Yes. The truth was terrible. Have you ever thought about the folks you've hurt? She demanded. Every day. So, why didn't you stop? He offered a sour smile. Do you believe stopping will make everything disappear? Ivy did not respond. She knew deep down that it wouldn't. However, this made accepting the truth more difficult. You came here looking for a confession, Dylan added. Now you have it. The space felt smaller, with the walls closing in around them. Ivy's mind raced with 1,000 ideas. What happens now? She asked gently. Dylan examined her closely. That depends on you. The response sent shivers down her spine. Are you threatening me? No, he said quietly. I'm telling you that the moment you walk out that door, you'll carry the weight of everything you've learned. Ivy was choking. Dylan did not answer. Maybe that's better than pretending it never happened. Outside, the waning sunshine created lengthy shadows on the floor. The day was coming to an end, as was the illusion that had previously defined their relationship. I trusted you, Ivy explained softly. I know. That trust wasn't for nothing. I never said it was. Dylan's cheeks flushed with real pain for the first time. Despite this, a little part of him appeared to care about what he had destroyed. You could still tell the truth, Ivy remarked. I just did. To the authorities. Dylan shook his head. Do you think they don't already know some of it? Her eyes expanded. They've been watching for months, he said. Maybe longer. The admission shocked her. So, why haven't they arrested you? Because I'm more helpful to them free than locked up. The inference was shocking. Are you working with them? Let's just say the story isn't as simple as it appears on paper. Ivy glanced at him, unsure what to believe. She believed she knew the man, but he had been replaced with someone far more intricate and dangerous. Is anything you told me true? She asked. Dylan's voice softened. The way I felt about you is real. The admission exacerbated the sorrow. Then prove it, Ivy replied.
How?
Finish the confession.
He paused.
What more is there to say? Everything you've been hiding. Dylan remained silent for several seconds. Then he took a big breath, as if about to release a load he had been carrying for years. You're not going to like what you hear, he cautioned. I already don't. He gave a hesitant nod. Fair enough. The atmosphere changed as Dylan spoke again, this time without hesitation. He told how things began, when a seemingly innocuous decision led him down a course he couldn't reverse. One position led to another, and he quickly found himself surrounded by people with considerably greater influence than he had thought. Ivy listened in startled stillness. Each detail created a darker picture than the last. The tale had names she recognized, strong figures who had carefully kept their secrets hidden. By the time Dylan finished speaking, the reality seemed heavier than Ivy had expected. You can see why walking away wasn't easy, he replied gently. Ivy strained to control her breathing. And the man in the photograph, Dylan closed his eyes briefly. That was the moment everything went too far. The confession hung in the air like a final conviction. Ivy realized there was no turning back. The truth had been revealed, and with it came consequences that neither of them could avoid. Dylan had to confront the life he'd created on lies. For Ivy, it meant determining whether revealing the truth would ruin him or finally bring justice to those he had left behind. And at that delicate moment between confession and consequence, the destiny of both their lives was at stake.